Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of OK Copy Podcast. Today, we have David Weinstein, executive producer and head of production, most recently head of production at Complex. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Hi, Tahira. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you.
I've been on a few podcasts where we're talking about production and stuff like that, but I have a feeling this one's going to be the best.
It is. Yes. It is really just like introducing everyone to all of our conversations, our day-to-day conversations. I'm excited for everyone to hear all that you have to share because you drop gems on me left and right, even just prior to recording, just now.
I just love the fact that the podcast is called OK Copy because that's just such like a production. Even now when people like write things to me, text or whatever, always copy. Mm-hmm. Like without fail. Even, I mean, just before we started rolling, and I'm like, hey, Tahira, I'm 10-1.
Exactly.
Like, and you're like, got you. Like, and, you know, just things like that for those who aren't in production. 10-1 means you're going to the bathroom. You're just going to be out for a minute. Do I need to explain that? Or people who are going to watch this know production, I'm assuming.
Not everyone. That's a part of it, too, is introducing some folks to it. Gotcha. And then people say OK Copy that are not in production have no idea what it really means. So welcome. So tell everyone a little bit about yourself. Always like to take it back also to where you started, how you got to being the head of production of Complex, but also just super production consultant, operations wizard, which I look forward to digging more into as well.
Yeah, sure. I'll just say being the head of production at Complex was a really kind of stroke of luck, and I can, I don't know if we're going to include this part or not, but if I wasn't fired at another job, I would have never become the head of production at Complex. I can tell that story another time, or we can maybe talk about that today. It's a little tease for the for the remainder of the podcast. But no, I've been in the industry a minute. I started in the late 90s. I'm a total Nepo baby. We were just talking about this off camera. I'm the baby of my family, and I have a cousin who's 15 years older than me. When I was a teenager, she was working at NBC Sports. She was a production manager, and she was doing NFL. She was doing the French Open, Wimbledon, the Olympics. I was a tennis player my whole life, and I played. And
I did not know that.
What? That is my tennis is my passion.
How did we never talk about this?
You play?
I play all the time.
What are you doing?
I've been playing since middle school, elementary school.
All right, so we need to head.
Yes.
Oh yeah, we're gonna go.
Wow. Okay.
So my cousin Lisa, who is the person who got me in when I was like 13, 12 years old. We were having some conversation, some family event, and I was like, man, you've got the coolest job. And she's like, well, when you turn 18, I'll hire you, and you can come and work for me at the French Open. Nice. And I was like, all right, not thinking anything of it. And then it must have been my first semester of college, and I hit her up, and I was like, hey, is that offer still on the table? And she was like, totally. And she hired me, and I went to Paris, and I worked for NBC Sports at the French Open. It was like the greatest... Being 18 years old and getting paid to be in Paris for 2.5 weeks or whatever it was, and just running around, and like we had to do some wild stuff when I was there. I remember our production compound didn't have like a kitchen because there were just a bunch of trailers. I think now the French Open has like a proper broadcast center, but at the time it was a bunch of trailers. And so we had a chef who would make all this food, all the craft service and all the food, but he didn't have a dishwasher. And so every meal, the runners, that was NBC had like this level of like person who was like a runner, is like below PA. Not a lot. I don't see a lot of people getting hired. Do you see that position a lot?
Not
runners?
As much anymore.
Yeah,
no.
But like back in the day, like a runner it was like a Nepo job where they were like, we'll make you do anything.
Yeah, it was kind of like you weren't trained enough to be a PA and be trusted with certain responsibilities, so you just be a runner.
Right, yeah. And so the responsibilities that I had was basically washing dishes and finding John McEnroe. And that was the job. No, it's for real.
Wow.
Like John would, like we'd have to get him from like the broadcast center over to center court where the booth was, where they were doing the broadcast. And like, it was probably, I don't know, a 200-yard walk to get into center court, into the press entrance. And John would just fuck with us so bad. Like he would take us and go into this other entrance on the other side of center court, which was the players' entrance. And because it's John McEnroe, and he could go anywhere he wants, and he'd walk in, and then they'd look at our badge, and they'd be like, "You're not coming into the players' entrance," and he'd ditch us, and then like somebody would get on walkie and be like, "Where's McEnroe? Like, we're going live in 3 minutes," and I'd be like, 18 years old, like, I don't know. Like, he went into the players' lounge, and they're like, "You better," and everyone's running around and yelling at each other, and then like he just show up like, right on time.
Right, like a minute before.
Yeah.
Even. Yeah.
And you'd be sweating and, all that stuff. But no, it was a good gig. But like the idea of just being in Paris and traveling and like I'm in the edit room with all these creative people and seeing these people, I was like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
Like, this is it. Like, and I was not like a film major or anything like that. I was undeclared. I still didn't change my major at the time when I got back to school because my school didn't have that major, like a broadcast major. But I was having such a good time in college, I didn't want to leave. So I spent the next 4 years. I had some internships, working local news. I worked for NBC. I dropped out for a year, worked at NBC. Well, I dropped out here in New York. I was working at 30 Rock and just spiraled.
Okay.
But that's
what were you doing at NBC?
I was a runner for the weekend, for the NBA, like halftime, pregame and halftime shows. The NBA on NBC.
Nice.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
Like dun, 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 dun.
Before it became TNT.
Right. Totally. So it was our talent.
Because I think that song still exists.
Are they still using it?
If not now, definitely within the last like 5 years, I've heard it. Yeah.
That song is like classic. I listened to that song so many times. Dun, 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 dun. We're gonna have to pay John Tesh some royalties. My talent was it was Ahmad Rashad, it was Hannah Storm, it was Isaiah Thomas, and it was Pete Vesey. Pete Vesey was a writer for the New York Post.
Okay.
And like, my job was like getting them coffee and running around and like, giving tours of 30 Rock and stuff like that. I remember to this day, and he might deny this, but I truly believe that I gave Isaiah Thomas his very first cappuccino. Because I remember we were getting Starbucks. And Starbucks was like a new thing. Like this was in '99. So it was like a pretty much like, there weren't like Starbucks all over New York. And I want to say it was Ahmad ordered like a cappuccino, and then Isaiah like took me aside. He's like, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, it's espresso with steamed milk." And he's like, "Can I get one of those?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure thing." Like,
nice.
Like you're Isaiah Thomas, get whatever you want. But I don't know if that's
his palate.
I don't know if it's actually true that was his very first. Maybe he didn't hear or something like that. But yeah, so I worked at 30 Rock.
Okay.
The best thing about that job was. It was, we were taping on Saturdays and Sundays. So on Saturdays, when SNL was in season, they would be rehearsing up on the 8th floor. And so I used to sneak up to the 8th, Studio 8H had like 2 levels. It had like the main level on H, and then on the 9th floor it had like the balcony. If you've ever watched Saturday Night Live, there's like that balcony. So I would go up to like the balcony and just watch rehearsal, and then watch the musical guests do their sound check, which was always around like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. And so I would see everybody from like U2 to Ricky Martin to like everybody, whoever performed on Saturday Night Live in '99, 2000, 2001, I would like go watch their sound check. That's a pretty sweet job. It was pretty neat.
Yeah.
I liked it.
I'm assuming like it built your anticipation and your interest even more, just like watching shows like SNL film and take place.
It just made me want to be around.
Yeah.
Like I loved being a part of it.
Yeah.
I never wanted to be the guy, but I loved being one of the people behind the guy or whatever.
Right.
And so it was just neat. Like it was just, you got to watch people that you grew up watching or bands that you saw, like all of it. Even when I was doing basketball or whatever, like to this day, when you meet people that you had a crush on when you were a kid, that you were a fan of when you were a kid, it triggers something. Less so now. I don't get it as much anymore.
Yeah.
From time to time it happens, but back then, every day.
Is there anyone now that would maybe leave you a little starstruck or get little David excited inside?
Michelle Obama.
Yes.
I think like the Obamas would trigger that for sure. So I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. I went to college in Buffalo, New York, and I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. Anybody from the Bills, because I'm such a fan, that I would say like, and when I was at Complex, Stephon Diggs came through the office once. He plays wide receiver for the Bills. and I had to give him a tour. I didn't have to, but our head of PR, Piper, was like, "Hey, Stefan's downstairs. Can you give him a tour?" And I was like,
"Of course,
like, obviously." And I remember because I was trying to keep it so pro, and so like 30 minutes into this tour, I finally like broke character, and I was just like, "Listen, I don't know if they've told you, I'm a huge Bills fan. I just like need you to know how much you mean to the city, to me as a fan." And then I talked to, like, I had like my 3 minutes where like I was like a fan for a minute, and it felt great.
Nice.
And he totally let me do it.
And he received it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first off, he's an incredible person. Like, and I want to hang out with him. He just like everywhere on Instagram, he's just like at fashion shows and like posing for Hilfiger at the Met Gala. Like it's pretty dope. But yeah, that's like if the Bills are playing, and then I'm trying to think anybody else. Probably Julianne Moore, because I've always thought she's just like, I've always had a crush on Julianne Moore. I shouldn't say this. My wife's gonna like laugh so hard, but like I've always kind of thought that she's like, as far as like actors go, I've always had like a big crush on Julianne Moore. Nice. Even from like what was that movie with Hugh Grant where she's having a baby from the 90s? What was that? I forget what that movie's called, but I'll remember it. Yeah, anyway. But yeah, okay. What about you? I mean, who's your like? Who would like? Are you still starstruck or?
Definitely Michelle Obama.
Right. Yeah.
That's what it's like. Yes, Michelle and Barack. I'm surprised I actually haven't met them or come across them yet. I don't know if I'd be starstruck, but the little girl inside me would be so excited to meet Beyonce. I've been to every Destiny's Child Beyonce concert except for the Carters, and actually because I felt a way that she was sharing the stage because I've been going to see her for so long. Yeah. So I would say Beyonce, Michelle Obama.
Are you going on Sunday?
That's really it. I'm going on her birthday.
Which is Saturday.
In LA on September 4th.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Intentionally, hoping that she puts on the best show.
I thought I came this close because, she played in Louisville last week, and tickets were like $70. And I told my wife, who's from Kentucky, I was like, we need to fly to Louisville and go see Beyonce.
I just need to see her in New Orleans. I'm trying to rally as many people as possible. It's the last show. And I just feel like the last show is going to be so special in New Orleans. She gets so much influence from there as well. So I'm saving that as like a backup second show. It's not till late October.
She's going to bring in like all of the bands.
That's what I'm saying. Like it's going to be a big, it ends the whole tour. Like why not go big, go home? Hoping maybe she brings some people out in LA for her birthday as well. So
that'd be wild if she brought some like Louisiana people
or Big Frida.
Yeah, that would be a fun show to go to. Yeah. I met Beyonce once. Yeah. When she was still with Destiny's Child, and it was like a very famous event. It was the NBA Finals. I was working for NBC. This was in, I want to say 2000. The Sixers were playing the Lakers, and we were going. I was flying between Los Angeles and Philadelphia, and Destiny's Child did the halftime show for one of the games in Philadelphia. Nice. And I'll never forget this. And this was like pre-internet, so like it didn't go viral. It would have. But the way that the costume designer set up, I think they played 2 or 3 songs, one of which was Survivor. I don't know if you remember this in the Survivor video when Michelle has her solo, like she has this like one kind of bridge, and like she does the bridge in Survivor. So when they did this during the halftime show, they had these like backup dancers, and the backup dancers like hoisted her. Like it was kind of like, it was almost kind of like the way that like in ancient Egypt, they like put her on her shoulders, and they like had her up on their shoulders, and she was doing her solo. Now the problem was the costume designer, whoever did this, they made these like costumes for each of the 3 members. Now Beyonce was wearing I want to say that she was wearing like this generic NBA getup. Kelly was wearing like a Sixers jersey, and they gave Michelle a Lakers jersey because they were trying to make it equal, or maybe Kelly and Beyonce switched. I don't remember. Michelle was definitely wearing a Lakers jersey. And when the dancers put her on their shoulders and she did her bridge, the entire Philly crowd at the whatever the building was called at the time just starts booing the shit out of her, like booing the shit out of her.
Damn.
And it was like, and I was in the control room in the truck out in the park, and they were like, it was so loud. Like I remember hearing the boos in the truck, And we were all like, whoa, like they're booing Destiny's Child. And Destiny's Child was pretty big back then.
They're huge. But also, the producer in me is like, that's such a miss and such a production fuck up because you should have known. Like, it's a rivalry. Don't put her in a Laker jersey. I know they were doing like aesthetically to like just balance it out. But yeah, that's funny.
And so after the performance, I had to go back into the building to make sure that we were ready for like, we were doing a hit right before the game got back with our halftime team, and I had to I think I had to escort Destiny's Child back to their green room. They were all crying, and I felt terrible. Yeah. I mean, Michelle was definitely crying. I'm pretty sure Beyonce. I don't know. I don't remember seeing Kelly, but it was like a shit show. Like everyone was upset. Everyone was like yelling at each other.
Can you imagine being booed on stage? Like such a prominent opportunity.
They were one of the biggest at the time. One of the biggest groups in the world. Yeah. So that's my Beyonce. But that was 23 years ago. Days. Yeah. Not like Beyonce that we know her now.
Today.
Yeah. No.
She's a whole different place. There was a New York Times article circulating around that was like Beyonce is no Ashanti. Did you see that resurface a couple weeks ago?
Like Ashanti, like Ja Rule Ashanti, or like Ashanti, like the queen of like.
It was like, well, it was during the time when she was kind of like the queen of R&B.
Oh, not like the kingdom of Ashanti, but like...
No, like Ashanti.
Like Ashanti.
I love that. That's what you're like, they have to be talking about the kingdom of Ashanti.
That's what I'm thinking. What, she's pretty... I mean, she's not going to be like as powerful as an African kingdom. But
right.
Yes,
she's up there.
Yeah, she's pretty
But
huge.
this was like from 20 years ago, so it started recirculating like, oh, where is this writer now? That did not age well.
There's a place for everybody's heart for like those Ashanti solo. I even remember when I saw an interview with Lin-Manuel Miranda when Hamilton had just dropped, and he was saying that and I forgot what track it was. Like one of the tracks, it might have been the one. What was that track? Helpless, the one where he meets his wife. Hamilton meets his wife. That was kind of based on Ashanti. Nice. And I think he even said that, and his rap part was supposed to be like the Ja Rule portion.
Oh, cool! I've never heard that.
This is never gonna get out of your head. You're gonna listen to this now.
Yeah, I am. I'm gonna go back.
Helpless, and that was like the Ashanti part.
I love it. Okay, so
we are not
typical.
We're not talking about production.
It's okay. We do this. Take us back to, well, you also just shared so much insight in all of it. So you worked a lot in sports.
I came up in sports.
You came up in sports.
Yeah.
And where did you go from in the NBC 30 Rock?
Right. So I got out. I didn't get out right away. So I stopped working for NBC after the Salt Lake Olympics in 2002. Okay. I took a job at a production company for a year that was also doing a lot of sports stuff with ESPN and X Games and stuff like that. And then in 2003, I joined a startup called College Sports Television, and they got bought by CBS Sports. So basically, until 2006, I had been working in sports. Mm-hmm. But there was an experience that I had in 2001 that I talk about a lot, where I was working on the NASCAR tour. I was a production assistant for NBC Sports, I was a runner. I was still a runner. Mm-hmm. I was a runner for a long time.
Sounds like it. Okay.
And I was in the trailer on a 4-month job. We were driving race to race for NBC on the NASCAR tour. And I started in August 2011. Mm-hmm. And I finished in November of 2011. So between the time I started and the time I finished was September 11th. I was not in New York. I was in Vermont on the way to a race in New Hampshire. But my September 11th experience, and this is as a New Yorker, was very much being not in New York. And so it was crazy times, and I was on the road. But I remember being in the trailer, and my production manager, Tim DeKime, who was overseeing all the production for NBC, his wife called the truck. And he wasn't around, so I took a note. My pad and paper is 2001. And she left a note to say that their son or daughter, and I forget which it was, had scored a goal in their soccer game, back home. And I took the note, and I remember I was like, all right, and I hung up the phone. And I remember I had this epiphany, and I was 22, 23 years old. And I was like, holy shit, if this is me in 10 years and 20 years, and I'm gonna be on the road doing an NFL game every week and a college football game every week and NASCAR, Olympics, whatever it is, if I miss the things that are going to be important to me, and I'd always kind of figured at some point, even though I always said in my 20s I didn't want to have kids, but I figured like I would at some point. But I was like, holy shit, if I'm on the road for the rest of my life, this is not the life I want to live.
Right.
And I had decided at that point to kind of get out of sports, stayed in sports until 2006, when I finally left CBS Sports after they had acquired CSTV. And then that is also around the time that I kind of went all in on my production company. And kind of pivoted more towards doing branded content and advertising and stuff like that.
So what made you want to start a production company? And also, just for the people that are looking to follow paths and define their paths in this, you went from runner to what role?
So I went from being a runner to being a production assistant. And then when I got hired by that production company in 2002, it was called Wave Entertainment. The man who ran that, his name was Warren Pick. He's still directing. Was a real mentor for me. He hired me as an associate producer. So I was an AP for a year, and then when I got hired by CSTV in 2003, they hired me as a feature producer. And by the time I had kind of wrapped at Wave, that production company, I had been producing some of my own stuff, and so I felt comfortable going into this role. Although my buddy Stash, who ended up being my business partner, he recommended me for this job and told him that I was also a shooter. And I had never shot anything in my life. And so that was an interesting, because like...
Did that become an expectation?
Yeah, totally. And like, it wasn't like it is now where like you could just share your reel online. There was no like, they basically just like trusted the fact that I could shoot.
Right.
And I had to learn pretty quick how to shoot stuff. And
what type of stuff were you shooting?
Like feature stories, like athlete profiles, like game previews, stuff like that. It was really basic stuff.
Easy stuff to start.
Right. It was not like we weren't doing anything wild, but we all had to shoot our own stuff. So it was like a lot of like, you're going out with like a Sony VX2000 or a Canon XL1. You've got like a Sennheiser lavalier kit, a few Lowell Omni lights, tripod. Maybe somebody's with you, most likely not, and you just have to like set it all up. And it was very run and gun. It was very lo-fi. But we were a startup, and that was right when digital filmmaking kind of became more of a thing, when mini DV really blew up, and right before Panasonic had come out with the DVX100. It was a few years before DSLRs became a thing. And so it was a really interesting time in production, because mini DV really changed the way that we shot. Because in 2002, 2003, it was either like you're shooting on film or you're shooting on like big broadcast cameras, Beta, SP, Digibeta, like big shoulder cameras, right? And then mini DV comes along, and the cameras, instead of being $60,000, you can get a camera for $3,000, $2,000. So you had a lot more people now who are starting to shoot music videos, shoot skate videos, just shoot short films and stuff like that. It was a real interesting time in the industry when we really started seeing like the first wave of the democratization of technology and kind of opportunity.
More production companies. More shooters.
Less union.
Right.
Right? Like you started seeing all this non-union work pop up, especially in New York. LA, I think it took a longer time for LA to go non-union, but New York was like, everybody wanted to hire non-union production companies because it was cheap.
It was cheaper.
And it was the internet. And all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, we need stuff for our website. There's no YouTube. Right. It's like, we need things for our website.
Get it up right now.
And the money was decent, especially if you were like a 25-year-old with paying $1,500 in rent or whatever. So
that's what led you to then starting your own production company.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, me and my friends just bought some cameras. Like we bought a camera, rented it back to the job that I had, and then made enough and rented it 15 days or whatever. That paid for it. And we bought another camera. Then we started buying lights, some audio. And by the time, this is in 2004, late 2004, and by the time we started really rolling, we had like 5 cameras. We had like a real operation. And then I quit my last job in 2006. I was a producer at CNBC. I created this show called Fast Money. Got out. Not Mad Money, the one with Jim Cramer. Okay. This show called Fast Money, which, by the way, is still on the air.
I was gonna say I'm not remembering the show exactly, but I've seen Fast Money.
Right.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. It's still like, I to this, like, I don't.
That's awesome.
I don't watch the show, but it's like a show that I helped create. But yeah, in 2006, I went all in on my production company, and that was that. I ran that for 8 more years. And at that point in 2005, 2006. again, it was right before YouTube blew up. It was right before Facebook came around. And all of these brands were just getting into doing, I guess what at the time we were calling like digital video. And it was funny for me because they wanted like longer form storytelling. And all of the agencies at that point had really only worked with like big production companies, union production companies, and none of those directors could either able to do kind of longer form storytelling because they were mostly doing 30s and 15s and stuff like that. And they were also union, so they couldn't do it cheap. And so there were a bunch of companies that came up in New York at the time. There was Humble, there was Missing Pieces. I mean, East Pleasant was like a smaller version of that, which is my company. But we were just running around doing digital stuff for, you know, and then we were doing like spec work for agencies, and it just became a thing. And then we blew up, and we were able to run it for 8 years, and that was a ride.
So this was 2006.
Yeah.
Social media came in around 2010.
Video on social media. Like there was social media. There was Friendster, there was MySpace, there was Facebook in 2006. But it wasn't until like, I mean, YouTube came in 2006, but YouTube didn't blow up until like brands really still weren't doing video right until like probably 2012.
It was like 2012. I remember negotiating early Instagram buyout and rights. That was like 2013, 2014.
That's when it really got nuts.
Yeah.
That was like that was like the second wave.
Yeah.
If the first wave was like 2005, 2006, 2012, 2013 was, I couldn't believe how many production companies were starting.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, I need to not have a production company because the market was getting so saturated.
Okay. See, for me as a freelance producer, it was gold.
Right.
It was like I was never unemployed. There was always a job, non-union, available. But I also remember, I'll never forget, we were doing a Nike women's spa. This is with All Day Every Day.
Okay.
And I think All Day was a part of that 2008, 2006, 7, 8 bloom as well.
Funny story. When All Day Every Day started, Kai was friends with my business partner Xander, and they needed office space. Their first office was our office at 151 Grand Street.
Nice.
So it was Phil, Kevin, Kai, and
MK? Well, MK he's like the owner, but...
Oh, yeah. He came, he used to, Michael.
Yes.
Yes, so he used to come, because he lived in LA.
Maybe, yeah.
I think so. He used to come through every once in a while.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But we were helping them get off the ground. We shot a music video for them. We produced a music video for them for, what was the name of that band? I forget the name of the band. Cobra Starship. It was this music video called Good Girls Gone Bad, and the only reason that the music video was even like got press was because they had one of the actresses from Gossip Girl, Leighton Meester, sang on the track, and she was in the music video. But yeah, All Day Every Day was in our office.
Who was the director? Was it Kai?
No. Yes, it was Kai. Okay. Kai was the director.
Kai was my first introduction to like working with and producing for a director.
Oh, really?
Yes, for Express commercials.
Oh my goodness.
It's insane.
Well, that was the thing, because at the time he was a fashion photographer.
Yes.
And so he was really well known for his fashion photography. I want to say that was the first time he directed a music video.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that history. I actually assumed that he came from music videos, but I think that was also just like the brand of All Day in general. So we were running Express, and we were going around and doing these large rock the sidewalk public runway shows.
Yes.
And so the production company that I was with, we started with a fashion show production.
Gotcha.
And then I think it was the CEO of Express was like, you're spending $1 million and I don't have a commercial. I don't have any content from this. You just have these beautiful, fashion shows, which were great on the ground. He's like, we need more. And so we ended up doing co-pros with All Day Every Day. And Kai was the director. Nice. Nicola at the time, I think she's at Match now, but at the time she was the head of production. Yeah. And taught me everything I know till this day. How to run a binder, how to build a call sheet, because you didn't have to do any of that in events.
No, not as
production schedules and vendor documentation, but not call sheets.
Right.
And the level of detail. So wow, okay, yeah.
So we have that All Day Every Day connection.
We do. We're learning a lot of new things about each other in this conversation today.
I was always like, back then I was always like, my business partners were always like, they were like the face of the company. Okay. I was like in the back, just like trying to keep it together.
Were you? Okay, so let's talk about that. Yeah. So you started it, you guys were kind of in this boom, this 2006 boom. They were in the front doing what?
I mean, they were directing, they were producing, okay. And at the time we had some legacy clients, so we were doing so many different things as a production company. We were still doing a lot of legacy sports stuff, so we were doing everything from like, we did like the show open for the Washington Nationals in their stadium. Nice. Like they hired us to go down to spring training and we shot all their guys. We would do documentaries for MSG Network. We would do, but then we would do like regular commercial work. We would do like a commercial campaign for Royal Caribbean that was like a Super Bowl spot. We would do stuff for Procter & Gamble and like, so like we did all kinds of different work and we kind of pooled our relationships. But they were, when I say they were the face, I think they were, and I don't mind saying this, they were better directors. Like they were good directors. And so Xander and Damien especially, like Xander had come from the agency world and he had a lot of experience. And so he was just getting more board flow. He was getting more opportunities. And so because I knew that he was going to get more board flow. Now, I mean, I wanted him to be, I wanted him to get the bulk of the work. That was going to make us more successful. And then we were trying to sign other directors. I mean, there were some directors that were on our roster. We had Gene on our roster at one point. Brad Hasse was on our roster at one point. Molly Chiat, who's now at Honor Society, was on our roster at one point. So like we had some really great directors, but we just were never amazing. like kind of getting over that big hurdle that like some of that has like missing pieces, or maybe Fake Love had they'd gotten over like some bigger humps and either got acquired or kind of signed that big director that ended up being like the difference maker. We never hit that milestone and got over that hump.
And so while they were directing, you say you were behind the scenes. Yeah. What were some of the things that you were doing? Was this when your operational process started developing?
Yeah, I was just running the business. Yeah. Like it was, even when we started it, it was like, now it's a lot easier, but back then, I mean, this all goes back to like, you had to like, file an articles of organization. You had to get a bank account. You had to like learn, I remember I had to learn QuickBooks. And I had partners who, I love those guys, but they just weren't that interested in doing any of that shit. And I think for me, I was like, my grandmother was a bookkeeper. My mother's a bookkeeper. So I was like, all right, I could do this. And then you just start learning about other things, labor law, because when we first started the company, we put everyone on a 1099. We got nailed by the Department of Labor. So then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, now I have to learn labor law. I have to learn rights and clearances, IP, you just learn it as you go. And so then I became more interested in the business side of it than I did with the creative side of it. And I remember, and I still say this to this day, I remember like the greatest satisfaction I would have as a business owner would be like I would come into the office and I would see somebody working on, editor, producer, whatever, and I had no idea who that person was. And I every time I saw someone I didn't know who they were, that was the best for me because I knew that person was working for me and helping my company grow and make money. And I didn't bring them on, so that meant I was doing something right.
Right.
Because we were so big, or at least busy enough, that like I didn't know everybody in the office.
It was a representation of the scale.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But I just loved running the business, and so that became really more of a passion for mine, which ended up being the spark that led to a lot of the other roles that I've had later in my career.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So fast forward, you've had the company for 6 years?
10 years.
10 years.
Altogether, yeah.
Okay. And then you guys decided you wanted to move in separate directions or got tired of running a production company?
It's a combination. I think it was probably three things. I think it was business wasn't great.
Okay.
We all were starting to kind of be more interested in pursuing other projects, whether that meant like one of us wanted to be a union director, one of us wanted to do more documentaries, and documentaries at the time weren't paying because there's no like Netflix. Back then documentaries really didn't pay. Now documentaries, like people will pay you for docs. Right. Back then docs were still not the kind of thing that you made money on. But we all just had different things. At that point, we all had, three of us had children. Now, let's see. Yeah, three of us at that point had children. So it was like, if you really want to run a business, especially at that time, again, 2014, where it was getting really competitive, I knew we weren't going to be able to make it work. And at that point, like, it just became too stressful. And you run a business. I mean, you know what the stress is like. And I don't think I fully understood how stressful it was until I shut the business down, and now I sleep well.
Don't tell me that.
It's the truth. Listen, and you know this, and I think anybody who's ever run a business, I mean, the satisfaction you get from running a business, like the peaks are better than any other peak. They're higher, but the valleys, they're deep.
They're deep. A lot of people are feeling that this year more than ever before. It's probably the slowest, worst year I've seen since I've been in the industry since 2009. It's really bad. A lot of companies are shuttering. Thankfully, we are not. We're launching new things, but it's really challenging, and it challenges a lot of people's beliefs in if what we're doing is right. And then you have the strikes that make you question if what you're doing is sustainable, if it's really going to be around much longer.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, so for me, I guess when we shut it down, that was a big move because it was the only thing I had done for 10 years. I mean, personally, it felt like, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to continue my career? I didn't know what I was going to be able to do because I'd just been a business owner. I didn't want to start another business. I didn't really want to be a director anymore. I took a year off, more or less, at that point. It took me a year to really kind of decompress. My daughter was 3 at the time. I kind of intentionally took a step back. Not to say it wasn't stressful. It's not like I was just like chilling, but I intentionally wanted to like separate myself from the business. Thought about getting out, didn't. In hindsight, I'm happy with that decision. I still believe in this industry. I still believe in the people in this industry. I still believe it's a good industry. I believe this industry is getting better. Not without its challenges, but yeah. And then after that, I started running other people's company, or started helping other people run their businesses.
So where did you go from after you took your year off?
So in 2015, I took a job at another production company. It was called The Station, not Station Films, but it was a company called The Station. They were affiliated with The Lodge, which was a big music house down on Varick Street. They needed an executive producer, help drum up business, help run their campaigns. They were agency-facing production company, some direct-to-brand stuff. I stayed there for a year. Again, we were just doing regular production companies, so we had some directors on our roster, mostly some spots, a lot of digital content, a lot of pharma stuff, and I was there for a year, and after a year I kind of just realized that I was like still running a production company and I wasn't happy with it, and I realized at that point I was like, all right, well, I ran my own production company, now I'm running somebody else's production company. I don't want to be at a production company anymore. And at that point, I really knew, and I kind of felt that earlier when we were towards the later days of East Pleasant, that I wanted to move agency side. And now, while everybody, that's usually like does it the other way, like most people are agency side and then start a production company, or agency side start a consultancy. I was like, I'd never worked at an agency. I wanted to know what it was like. And so I went out and tried to get a job at an agency. And fortunately, I knew Jason Stein, who was the CEO of Laundry Service. And in 2016, Laundry Service was just getting over their own hurdles and, kind of wanted to accelerate the business and kind of grow up a little bit. And they brought me on to be their head of production. And then I was all of a sudden went from, running somebody else's production company to being an agency. I mean, I went from having no agency experience to being an agency head of production.
So can you talk to me a little bit about the difference between the two? So I'm still very curious. Yeah. Sometimes I think about what would life be like if I go to the agency side. Is the grass really greener over there? It's
different. It's just different. So for me, the big thing for me was that I wanted to be closer to the creative. Right. Okay. I always felt like as a production company owner, production company director, that it was like, here are the boards, the idea is baked, the strategy is baked. Like there's so much baking being done that all they're asking you to do at that point is like, just finish the job. Like, like obviously like what's your vision? We want to, but like there was no insight as the production company into changing the creative or like, why are you doing it this way? And I was like, this is a terrible idea. Like, this is a terrible strategy. Not always, sometimes. And I wanted to be closer to that. So being on the agency side, I got all of that. Like, I got to work with strategists, I got to work with creatives, I got to work with account people, I got to work with analytics people, social people. So for me, it was exciting because I got to be closer to all of these other parts of the process that I never had access to.
Nice.
And so while I wasn't like, I didn't have the freedom or all that, I just felt like I was so much more collaborative.
Right.
And I could bring that production lens to problems, but then work with people who are coming at the problems with these other lenses, and it just felt so awesome.
And you're catching the problems earlier in the stages, right?
100%.
Like in the creative development versus catching kind of like the shit end of the stick, right?
Sure.
Like when you're on the production company side or you're just pure execution.
That's right. I mean, and I think agency producers, like the value that a lot of agency producers have, and the best agency producers are the ones who are able to best work with creatives and help them get their idea to that line where it's ready for the production company,
Right.
and understand the creative process, understand what's possible, understand like the realities of the world, and those are the best agency producers. Like they're collaborative, they have a lot of empathy, and that's what I loved doing that. And so then after laundry service, I went to Eye Crossing, and I was head of production there, and I loved it. I loved working agency side.
Yeah.
The reason I got out of the agency side was by the time 2019 rolled around, that's when I started at Complex. My only problem with the agency world was that, at least with the agency I was at, was that I felt like we weren't necessarily building audiences or building communities with the work we were doing. And so a lot of the times we would do this really great work, but nobody gave a shit because it was just like transactional work, or like, just putting a lot of paid media behind it. So somebody buys Aleve, or somebody buys Tylenol, or somebody buys shampoo or cleaning product or whatever. And it just didn't feel like what I was doing had a lot of purpose.
Okay.
Laundry service, we had more of that because we were doing social for some brands. I think that had some really great followings. Like when you're doing social for Jordan brand, and it has such a big community around Jordan, like that was like a lot of fun work. But then like when you're doing the same thing for like Kaboom cleaner, like no shade to Kaboom cleaner, like Oral-B toothpaste or whatever, but it's just not the same.
No one's really interacting and engaging with that content.
Yeah, and so at that point, I had decided that I wanted to move somewhere where there was more built-in audience, somewhere where there was like actual collaboration between the audience and the creators themselves. And that's when I had the opportunity to go to Complex, because I looked at what media companies were doing at the time, 2019. Like Vox was doing some exciting work. I think Eater, like all these companies, Complex, certainly Refinery 29, Food 52. Like it was an exciting time for media companies. Like people still didn't realize that they were like Vice.
Right.
Like people didn't realize that they were completely like, yeah, I know. Like nobody had called out the bullshit that they were all unprofitable, except for Complex was profitable. I should have. And so that's when I went over to Complex. And then the guy that hired me at Complex, the head of HR at Complex, was the head of HR at Laundry Service when they fired me.
Okay.
Yeah, so like if it wasn't that, for that, I'm not going to get into details about either of that, but
Yeah.
you don't have to bring that up.
You were mentally prepared. It wasn't you weren't mentally prepared, but it wasn't your first go around.
No.
Right.
And he called, I actually called him up to, I wanted to catch up with him because I knew he was at Complex. And then we had lunch and he was like, yeah, we're hiring for this position. And I was like, oh shit. And then I think, 3 weeks later I was, I got the offer. Yeah.
And so talk to me about your experience at Complex, and what you had to kind of like what the undertaking was when you went into there.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It was a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
I think when I started at Complex, I understood the magnitude of what this job entailed because the brand at that point was hot as shit.
Yeah. You said 2019, right?
2019.
Yeah.
So they had already done a few Complex cons. Hot Ones had just like, I want to say the first Gordon Ramsay episode had aired that year. Like Hot Ones had really just like kicked it into like another level. Sneaker shopping had just kicked into another, like the Complex was about as hot as it could have been at that point. Like everything was firing and I was like, oh my God. Like, this is a massive responsibility. Don't mess this up. And I was nervous for a couple reasons. I wanted to make sure that I could keep up with the pace because I'd been working agency side, which was a little bit slower. Right. And I was moving back to doing more like episodic and kind of more really digital content, which I knew was going to be a lot faster. I was nervous about culturally being a fit, just because the brand was so powerful.
Yeah.
And I had just a lot of anxiety, even though it's funny. Complex, I think a lot of people think of Complex as, covering hip hop and covering sneakers, but the ownership was mostly white.
Right.
But people saw Everyday Struggle, or people saw, a lot of, Speedy Mormon, or, Joe Budden, or, a lot of these shows. And so.
But although leadership was white, was leadership not like downtown skateboard streetwear?
Well, it's Mark Echo. Yeah.
Right.
No.
So it was like a certain.
There was, but I wasn't downtown skateboard.
Right.
Like, I lived in Westchester, and I mean, even though I grew up around New York, I was really like uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable. I was very aware of, I think, knowing that I had to make sure that I didn't fuck up the opportunity.
I just had a full circle moment, and I'm sorry to break like that, but you saying Mark Echo reminded me in high school, my first job ever was at the Echo outlet. Ended up overachiever, being assistant manager like my junior year of high school, which was like the coolest thing ever. But I remember stacking and merchandising Complex magazines, folding Zoo York and Complex like special edition t-shirts, them like flying off the shelf. So it's also just full circle moment to be sitting here right now talking about it. Just had to say that. Yeah.
But I just remember even going in on my first day, right? Like I was also older, right? And I remember I'll never forget the sneakers I wore on my first day working at Complex, and they were Adidas Sambas, because that's my favorite sneaker and it always will be. And I will say that wearing a pair of Adidas Sambas today in the summer of 2023 is much different than wearing Sambas 4 years ago, because right now Sambas are having a moment.
Right.
Sambas were not having a moment in 2019.
You're like, oh, what is this guy?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
It's funny to me now that and listen, I'm an OG for the Samba. In my opinion, it's just it's a shoe that will be classic forever. But it wasn't people were looking at, I felt like people were like, all right, but I just felt I always felt like I had something to prove. I probably didn't. And I had a big title, and I had a big role and a lot of responsibility, but I was aware that I had a lot of pressure, or at least I put it on myself, and I just didn't want to mess it up.
Right.
And so I worked really hard to do right by everybody. The problem was that and anybody who knows me, it's I was tough. I instituted a lot of things from the jump that weren't the most popular.
Such as?
Just things like being a little bit more accountable for costs, organizing things, being a little bit more systematic and process driven around certain things, which some people were yes, about time. Other people were why are you changing things? Right. We were doing fine before you came. So that kind of stuff. But I'm stubborn, and I believe in my systems, and at least I had kind of seen the way that things were working, and I was like, all right, this is how I feel we need to move forward, and leadership bought in on it, and so I went all in. And
did you start changing systems because you just like organization and process, but did you see how having systems also affected the bottom line?
100%.
Right. Drive more profitability. You could track the numbers, because that also was attached to your responsibilities, right?
I didn't get paid more by coming under budget, but but at the time,
it was expected of you to do so.
Yeah. And at the time, there was just a lot. There was more opacity than there was by the time I finished. Just because they didn't have the systems in place that they were, in a lot of ways, they were still a younger company, and so there were people who were there that had been doing it for a long time, that had their own systems, and here I come. And I'm now asking you to change it. But, you and I talked about this before we started recording, right? So I'm somebody who, I have, and I says this is my LinkedIn profile, raging ADHD. I've been, I feel like I was patient zero in, the early 90s, when I was in middle school and stuff. And so anytime I go into a situation and I feel like things are even a little bit out of control, it's such a trigger for me that all I want to do is organize it. Even though personally I'm not the most organized person, if I'm working somewhere, I'm all right, we need to line everything up and make it. And so when I started, there were definitely some gatekeepers there who kind of like, things were like, you had a lot of things flowing through one person. You had a lot of things flowing through one person, through one person. And that's really dangerous, right? Because like, what happens if that person gets sick?
Right.
What happens if that person quits? What happens if something happens to that person? And so I started decentralizing a lot of that and saying like, okay, let's take this out of your hands and let's build a system so that we can give it to everybody. Let's take this out of your hands and democratize that. Let's take it out of your hands and delegate that. And for the people who had kind of put themselves in the middle of those processes, they weren't happy because their existence was like being in the middle of that. And if anybody knows the way that I work, I might be involved in a lot of things, but I never want to be the bottleneck.
Right.
Like, even if I own a process, I make sure that there's like, that I deputize everything that I do. Like my coverage documents, and I'd love to share with you sometime. Like if you ever saw my coverage documents, like when I went on vacation, they're works of art. Because I never want, when I go away, I never want anything to fall through the cracks.
Right.
I want to make sure that everything is accounted for. And that's the kind of leader I am. And so that was the biggest change when I started at Complex.
Were most of the people that were in the middle, were those producers, production managers?
Yeah, I mean, higher than that, like, you know, like director level and stuff like that,
Okay.
you know, like, and so like all we were doing was basically like saying like, hey, let's take some of this responsibility off of you and let you be a better manager, be a better producer. You don't have to do all of this. Like we can let other people do this. We can make this information more transparent. And so that took a long time. But,
what were some of those systems?
I mean, everything from just like, you know, instead of one person having to run around and get this, and this, we would create a form where these 8 people can now just submit a form, and that information then goes into a database where 5 different people have access to it, right? It was stuff like that. It's like we're just doing a little bit of automation, a little bit of like form-based process, a little bit more organization with your spreadsheets or databases, whatever you're using, but making sure so that like not one person's responsible. And it's just documenting stuff. Right. So instead of like, let's say it's like a time card. Let's say 10 people have to submit a time card. Well, instead of one person running around the building and collecting 10 time cards, create an email alias where everybody sends in their time card to this alias, and then you have 2 production managers maybe who are responsible for checking all of them. Or maybe one person and then a backup, or maybe a production, you know, one person and a production account, whatever it is. So just making sure that everyone's aware of the process, making sure that process is documented, making sure that everybody understands the process, and then making sure that there's accountability and like an actual system so that people are responsible for it. Stuff like that. It's just, it's like, I don't believe like in these like, you know, like that much of a structure. Mm-hmm. In fact, like I will gladly do work that is, you know, quote, beneath. I don't care about any of that as long as it gets done. Yeah. And as long as there's responsibility and accountability.
And SOPs, basically.
That's it. And so like I did a lot of that. And then COVID happened. And then COVID made us do it even more. Right, because now you're spread out. Right. And then once COVID happened, then I was like, oh shit, all of these systems are now really working. Mm-hmm. And then I just doubled down. And then it became like an obsession to get everything organized.
What did you get more buy-in from your team during COVID? Were some of the people that maybe weren't believers, were they able to see that actualization of the process? Yeah.
I think eventually people understood that. I think people understood after a while that my intentions. I mean, to be honest, I think when I started, I think people weren't really sure what my intentions were. Like, I think if you come in and you start changing things, you start organizing, and, you know, people like, they might assume that you're like, that your power, you know, or like, you know, that your stuff, you know, and some of that's true. Like but I think ultimately people understood that like, I just wanted to help people work better. Mm-hmm. The way I've always described myself as a worker, right? And it kind of, it's a little bit of a servant leader mentality. But I think heads of production you're a football fan or not?
Not really.
Okay.
More basketball.
All right, sports term here.
I might know it. Go for it.
So the center of a football team, right? Everyone thinks of the quarterback as the leader of the team, right? Because, you know, in my opinion, the center of the football team is the guy who snaps the ball, is the leader of the team, because that person is in the trenches. They're calling audibles at the line of scrimmage. They're seeing what the defense is like. They're changing everything. And ultimately, when that ball is snapped, they're handing the ball off to the quarterback, and then they're just pushing people out of the way.
Yep.
They're getting muddy.
Yes.
They're getting dirty. They're just big fatties, just pushing people out of the way. And for me, that's how I've always seen myself as a head of production. I am like an offensive lineman, and I've got running backs and wide receivers and quarterbacks behind me who are just superstars, and I want them to cook. And my job as the head of production is just to push everybody else out of the way, grease the wheels, whatever you want to call it, and just make room so that they can get a few yards, they can make a big play, they can do what they need to do, and then go on SportsCenter and get highlights and get paid and become famous. And then I can just be covered in mud and know that we scored a touchdown.
You scored.
Yeah, that's enough.
But their win is your win too.
Yes.
Right?
But not everybody has that mentality.
Yeah.
I think the best producers that I know, and to kind of, this is all the way circling back, the best producers I know have that in them, have that kind of offensive lineman mentality, right? Like, I don't need to get the credit. I mean, some people I know do, and they love that, and they want to get that, and I applaud that. Like, self-praise is a really important thing right now. But for me, again, this is also me being 45, me being in the business a long time, me being a parent now, but I get much more satisfaction out of my team being successful and me knowing that I helped like push people out of the way to make
and
it.
play a role in that. Yes. Same. I think over the last couple of years, there's been a growth in the need for visibility. That is very new. It's something that I've struggled with because I've come up under you guys.
Right.
It's never been a concern. It's never even been something I thought of. What are awards? Who gives a fuck? Maybe if it's an Oscar.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
I've said that. I'll go to the Oscars.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably like the only award that has ever been a care, anything that has ever been paid attention to. 99% of my career, probably until like the last 3 to 4 years, where awards and lists and those now meant more opportunity. Brands started paying more attention to it. Your company having this meant a lot more. It meant that we're in the running. We're up for, I guess I can say this, but we're up for Stellantis opportunities, multiple. And that's all for an award. Yeah. You know? So it's like, I don't think that was the case though 10 years ago. No. 5 years ago.
Well, there were no Webbies, there were no Shorties. Right. I mean, there was Cine Golden Eagle, there were the Tellys. Yeah. You know, but it wasn't like it is now. Now there's an award for everything.
Exactly.
But yeah.
But I love you are taking me back to like just the root, and I think the personality and belief of a lot of producers, you probably just don't get to say it as much as like, I just want to see everyone win. I just want to be in that. I always say we're like the cornerstone for creatives and creative ideas. And so long as we're just like calling the plays and calling the shots and making sure everyone has what they need, we're good. I'm
good with that.
Yeah.
Somebody asked me, and I say this a lot, like, what's the measure of a good, like how do you define success for you? And it's so like, it's such a throwaway line that I say, but I say this a lot. I say, if I can sleep well at night, I feel like I'm doing things okay, right? Because even if I'm bullshitting people, I'm not sleeping well at night, because that's when you can't lie to yourself, but if I sleep well, I know that I'm checking all my boxes, people are doing their thing, people have direction, people are supported, people have the right types of motivation, being compensated fairly, everything's on the rails and going smoothly. Yeah, if I'm sleeping, that's a measure of success.
Yeah.
Because I'm never, I don't know, you tell me, before a shoot, how high do you ever get before a shoot? Like, how excited are you? Like, because people are always
I'm never excited before a shoot.
Right.
No. There's so many things that could go wrong. It's like the top of the fourth quarter for me. So it's like, you can't get excited. You just gotta you've gotta push through.
Right.
I may get excited towards the end of the shoot. Like after lunch, there is not a shit ton of overages. We're not going into overtime. Maybe overtime was approved. Then I'm starting to feel good. I'm starting to plan a wrap party. Where are we going?
Yeah, for sure.
Where are we going to eat? But then you still have to pray that, you make it through post. And the client's still happy. So I'm usually not fully satisfied until I see like the first cut.
I agree with you.
I'm not fully comfortable until I see that first cut.
People ask me before shoot, like, how are you feeling? I always get this, like, how are you feeling? Feeling pretty good. I always say it.
I ask people that a lot, and really? I feel like I need to stop. So I'm like, how are you feeling? And my producer's like, I mean, everything's on fire right now.
You know what I do? I used to, and I've done this like a lot, and people at Complex will laugh when I say this. I'm always like running around the office because I always want to be in motion. And I'll if I see someone I know they're working on a big project or complex project, I'll say, give me some good news. And that's why I always say that. I'm like, give me some good news. And then they're like they think of like one like little thing. I'm like, okay, great. Even though I know that they probably have like 20 pieces of bad news, I'm always like, give me one piece of good news.
Shift the mindset real quick.
Well, I'm trying. I mean, and I'm not somebody who wants to like, I'm not like a rah-rah type of person. Like I believe in, like, if it's going to be shitty, let's call it out. Like tomorrow's going to be a shitty day. This is going to be a shitty project. We have a shitty client. This is a shitty concept. Let's not try to kid ourselves and convince ourselves that everything's going to be golden when it's not.
No, and also having that conversation and being honest about it helps everyone around you prepare for that.
That's right.
And you start thinking about what are other potential solutions, what are things that you can try to get ahead of. I have a thing, well, I don't do it as much anymore because I'm really trying to let people own their projects.
Yeah.
But for a while, I'd probably say up until last year, I think I did it a couple times last year, but the night before a shoot, any possible thing that I think could go wrong, I haven't heard anything about, maybe wasn't addressed in the pre-pro meeting, things to I would just give a full checklist at the top of the morning, but like with an empowerment message, like we've gotten here, really, looking forward to tomorrow. Here's just a couple of things to just make sure we're crossing off the list. And a lot of things were tedious around client arrival, catering, all of those things make a difference. Those are things that are often forgotten about because the rest of the team is such in the weeds of making sure the rest of the shoot is actually happening.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're in the restaurant industry, right? Like we're in the restaurant business, right? Like, do you watch The Bear or no?
Yes, I haven't finished it, but I've watched a few episodes.
But I mean, anybody who's been to a restaurant, like, listen, if the steak is great, but the service was trash and the place was dirty and like the music was too loud, whatever, like, you're gonna remember everything else, even if the steak was great. Like, so we obviously need to deliver the steak, but we have to handle the rest of the
full experience.
100%.
From the moment people walk out of the door, especially when we're doing pickups, travel, shoots, anything like that, multiple locations. I need the Sprinter decked out, everything printed. Not so much anymore. We're trying to be sustainable, but every detail of the step of the process, tech scout, everything needs to have a full experience.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you don't provide that, because I know so many people who will hire me again because like Crafty was good. Yeah. Like, I had a great time with you on set. I want to work with Tahira again. This is before you've gotten to post-production. This is before you've shipped anything.
It actually sets the tone for post-production.
Oh my God, how many shitty edits have you had because of a terrible experience on set?
Yeah.
Like, I remember, one of my favorite agency producers, I don't know if I'm allowed to like mention Pamela Ye, she was at 360i, we were doing a spot for Target. It was a really difficult shoot, just because it was a really ambitious shoot and we had a lot of stuff to capture. We ended up not going into OT, but we lost light because we were shooting in like October. It was a Halloween spot, we were shooting early October. And I just remember, don't mention the name, but but I'll just say, like, I remember like getting off of set and like she's like, "You're gonna fucking owe us in post," and I couldn't say a thing because I knew I had to over deliver in post,
right?
Because of what had happened on set, and we did over deliver on post. I remember we had composers in the edit, like with keyboards, like we were like doing like original music, like we over delivered, but like a bad shoot. Or like where the service isn't good. Or a
bad experience.
Bad experience, forget it. Did you ever work in restaurants or no? You worked retail.
I worked retail. So I've been in retail since I had a work permit. Banana Republic for like a holiday, and then I was at Echo all through high school. Yeah. And a couple of other posts. And then straight into production. So retail into production. But I was in fashion and luxury. So that just came with a certain level of detail and experience that was necessary to retain clients. And my first boss was really particular about that. And then that stayed with me. It's two things that have kept me employed until this day. Now my hustle is different because I run a production company and I have to think much larger. But as a producer, it was always great experience, attention to detail, making everyone feel good and staying calm. Right. That's like most people, the EPs that I've worked with, are like, you are just calm through all of the chaos. I have to be.
You're the canary the producer is always the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
If you see a producer sweat, you know you're fucked.
You're fucked.
Right. Like anybody else, I'll let anybody else sweat on set. I don't really care, whatever. If the producer is sweating, that's the one person that has to stay calm the whole time.
It's a trickle-down effect. It's a domino effect. Once you lose it, they lose it on one crew member, or department head. It's a shitty experience from there, and people can congregate against. But I've never really had that experience. Thankfully, I've just kept it calm. I'll never forget this one shoot for Nike. We're doing a Nike Uninterrupted, like three-part series. Actually, my head of production now was my client.
Oh my God! All right.
And he brought us like our first big Nike gig, and Australia was on fire. This is like 2019. So many things were happening.
Yeah.
People were losing their homes. All types of stuff was happening.
Were you shooting in Australia?
No, we were doing VO in Australia because Serena was there and we needed VO from her. So we had to set up a studio and catch her in between practice, which is the whole thing.
Yeah.
But we were just running behind.
Yeah.
An hour, 2 hours behind.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. It's December, so we're up against the light for sure. But everyone started freaking out. I think it was like the EP, might have been MK. MK had no business on set. That was my mistake in the first place. But I think he freaked out and it kind of like started to spread. And I just remember getting on the walkie and being like, listen, everyone, there are people losing their homes. There are countries on fire.
Yeah.
We are making a commercial. It will be okay. Like, there is no reason to start spiraling right now. Let's have a good time. Let's get through this, and just like level set, because it only takes one person to start a spiral. And as a producer, you just got to kind of like reel people in and ground them and say, I've got you, I've got you. We've got each other. We're going to make it through this.
It's important.
Yeah.
And that's something that even if you're 2 hours behind, if shit's breaking, if like shit's not, understanding to like just take it back. Like, hey, like we are going to have to do less right now.
Right.
Like we don't have like full capacity right now. And like level setting is, you mentioned this a couple times just in our conversation, just kind of being transparent and like, being open about these conversations. Like without that kind of real talk, it makes it really difficult for us to do our jobs. And that's where the trust comes in.
Right.
Because again, you're giving somebody $500,000, $1 million for, sometimes 10 hours of work, maybe 2 days, 20. That's a lot of trust. There aren't a lot of industries, doctors, and I'm not saying that we're nearly on the level as doctors, but there aren't a lot of industries where you have all of this planning for a one-time shot. It's not like the theater where like I fuck up on a Tuesday. All right, I guess I got Wednesday's show. I can fix it. Like this is it. You've got that actor for 2 hours. You've got that building. You've got that helicopter for 2 hours. Whatever that is, there's no wiggle room.
Right.
And it's funny when you think about it in that, that like this is how we have to think about it.
Yeah, and sometimes you have $1 million to turn something around in like 2 weeks.
I know it.
3 weeks. I think the Nike one was about $1 million, and it was 4 weeks from treatment to production. We were approving and updating treatments as we go, like per episode as we were filming. It was nuts.
Yeah, the stress hasn't gotten any better over the years. But I will say, and tell me if you agree with this, I think as a whole, the industry's gotten better. I think the industry has, thank God we are now way less tolerant of the bullshit and the arrogance and the animosity and the anger, like that kind of stuff that we came up with. I certainly came up with.
Oh,
and
yeah,
so
I had books thrown at my head.
A lot of things thrown at me.
Yeah.
People say terrible things to me. Like just people said the worst things to me coming up in this business, where like, I'm happy that the industry is in a better place. I'm happy that we continue to weed out the people who need to be not in this industry, you know? So that's got, with all that stress, I think, but at the same time, and I say this a lot, I think that because of the internet, because of, having all this information, I think we've become a little bit too reliant on that stuff, where I think that like, production it's made in some ways production easier, but in other ways I think that we rely on that stuff a little bit too much, where like you could, of course I can find something on Amazon and get it to you tomorrow. But I'd much rather you thought of that last week.
Right.
Like that would be my preference, that you don't have to order it the day before the shoot. I know they've got next day shipping, but next time, just get it a little bit. Just get it last week.
Next day shipping isn't always guaranteed, although it says that.
It's nice. It's a nice to have. I certainly don't rely on it. I'm still very much put somebody on a plane to get that. I'm a little bit old school in that regard. Like, we need to get that tomorrow. I'm like, okay, put them on a plane. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah.
Go get it.
I mean, you're paying a PA, $250, $300 for the day, paying for 2 days, feed them, put them on the plane. That extra $500, that's the peace of mind that I want.
So if there was one thing that, not even one thing, what are some things you wish you knew? Like going into, let's say post-production company.
What are things that I wish I knew if I was starting a company again?
Yeah.
Well, I think I wish I knew. So when I started my production company, we started a post-production company shortly after. The dumbest move that we ever made was not bringing in an editor as a partner. Because if you have an editor as a partner, then that's a guarantee that one of your partners is going to be working full time, doing the thing that people want them to do. Like we had a post-production company within our production company. We didn't have any editors as partners. It made it really difficult for anybody who want to work with us because they didn't have equity in the company. And so I guess maybe the bigger thing is, I say, if I ever started another company again, I would give equity to every single person that was on my team. If it was my company, everybody would have ownership in the company.
Really?
Yes, I would do profit sharing, 100% do profit sharing.
Okay.
And on some level, like I would be transparent with the numbers. I'd be transparent with the success, with the failures. If we make a lot of money, then I'd be much more transparent and provide more equity. And I'd have company bonuses set up on company performance.
Yes. I'm here for the bonuses. I don't know about the equity.
Well, I guess equity in the sense,
or equity in the maybe in the projects.
That's what I mean. Like not in the sense that like you own a percentage of the company, but like if we're working and we're making X more per year and I'm making all of this more money, I would want that, I want to trickle that down.
Some sort of like profit sharing bonus incentive.
More
plan.
investment in the success of the company.
Yeah, agreed. There was something that Zendaya did. I can't remember what film it was. Remember, and she gave all of the crew got equity.
Oh, really?
In the project. I'll have to look it up and drop the link. But
she's great.
Yeah, she's awesome.
My God, I mean, she's going to win again for Euphoria, I'm imagining, right? Did she? Well, she wins every time she does Euphoria. I mean, like that role is it's impossible to lose if you have that role.
Yeah.
It's such a heavy role.
I'm sad that let's see if it's being discontinued or what's going to happen next. Which one?
The one with The Weeknd? Yeah.
No, I wasn't into it.
Everything I read about it.
There was terrible reviews.
Right. I just I can't watch this.
Yeah.
So that's right. I watched The Bear.
I need to finish The Bear. I watched Dave. I've binged Dave.
Oh, I didn't watch it.
I love it.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dave.
We got to talk about The Bear after you're done, because this season was one of the best seasons of television that I ever saw. And I mean, to be honest, just for the fact that they're playing music that they're playing REM, which was my band growing up. I feel like between Sambas and REM, I'm having I'm having such a moment right now. No, listen, I mean, right now I feel like it's just all of the things that I liked in high school.
They're circling back.
Yeah, it's amazing to me.
No, that's great.
I mean, I wish I was a little bit but it's so funny to me seeing. Again, going back to the sambas, seeing kids wearing sambas.
I love it. I need some sambas.
That's the best shoe ever.
So, okay, rounding it out.
Yes.
Any advice? Three points of advice. So first, for directors.
Okay.
Any advice for current directors, aspiring directors? Advice for directors.
At what stage in their career?
I'm going to say emerging, because a lot of directors I'm speaking to, or even on our roster, are emerging. Maybe they have a couple of commercials. Maybe they have one commercial, or branded piece, let's say, on their roster, and they're looking to develop more opportunities.
I think right now in 2023, I think directing is it's almost kind of like stand-up in a way that stand-up comedians, you have to go out and grind and test your material, see if it works. I feel like as a director, you kind of have to do the same thing, right? Because, and I think it's easy now just because of social video, like, TikTok or wherever you're putting it, but like just say TikTok, right? Or, YouTube. Like it's never been easier to shoot your own stuff, edit your own stuff, push it out there for consumption. And so the technology, the cost of the technology, the ease of the technology has made it so easy that there's no reason as a director, as somebody a creative that is getting into this business should not be trying to get their hands dirty as much as possible, right? Like when I was younger, we were shooting videos all the time. We would just go out and shoot. We'd be in studios with artists. We'd be, oh, this person's got a band. Hey, can we shoot your music video? Like, it was like anything we would shoot. If it was good or it was bad, we were just as much as possible. And mind you, we were at different stages in our life and everyone's at a different stage. You don't know, some people have side jobs, some people have full-time jobs, some people have families. But if you're able to get out and just shoot and practice your craft, do that. That's number one. Number two is that you have to network. And whether that's taking lunches with friends and asking for advice, having mentors, just doing LinkedIn shit and doing it in positive ways, you have to network. You have to put yourself out there. You have to ask for help. You have to ask for advice. You have to be vulnerable. And even like I've taken calls as like mentor calls, like people reach out to me and they're like want to talk on my perspective, and then they end up just like wanting to prove to me like all the things they did. And I was like, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Like congratulations, you're in the industry. Like now talk about what you want to be doing and not talk about how awesome your work is.
Right.
Like so I do that networking, mentoring.
Yeah, so networking is not just for business people. Like I think sometimes creatives need to be reminded that they too need to be out here mixing, mingling, networking, and building their relationships and figuring out how to relationship manage as well and follow up. And that is a skill that is necessary for creatives as well as producers, yeah? Well, and what would your advice be for producers?
To like raise their profile and stuff like that?
Or in general?
It's tough. I mean, it's really difficult, I think, as producers right now, because I think that you and I both know how valuable producers are. And I don't think the world is still yet convinced of that. And it's always been difficult, I think, in general for producers to assert their value and to kind of let people know how important we are. But now that people are shooting their own things, creating their own things, pushing stuff out in just massive volumes at scale that we've never seen before, it's become more of kind of like a prevailing thought that I think producers are not as important. Because if I can just run out and shoot this and edit it, why do I need you to produce it? Right. If I can just, get this footage from a footage library, why do I need to produce it? And so I think as a producer, you have to find value in places, you have to just find that value. You have to find where you can become valuable. And it's not easy. That's where the networking thing becomes, because at the end of the day, what are we doing? We're figuring out how to do things that other people can't solve. Right. And so I think sometimes you just have to kind of find the problem, because otherwise people don't even know that they need a producer. And that's a really difficult thing, I think, as a producer right now. Certainly as a head of production. I mean, certainly, like a lot of companies don't even think they need a head of production, right? And like don't even, but I'm of the belief that if you want to scale, I think you do need that process. You do need that organization. You do need all of that. And then networking. You just network. You can't network enough. I mean, think about it this, right? Like when we started in the industry, people were in offices. Like I'm still friends with people from my first 10 years of my career on a different level than the people in the second half of my career.
Same.
And now you're remote, you're hybrid, whatever it is, you don't have those relationships anymore. I don't think people are having the same types of relationships that we did when we were in the office and going out afterwards, even if you don't drink, even if you don't party. So you're still doing things around people. It was just a different life. And that created relationships that doesn't exist anymore. So it's going to be even more difficult now for producers and I think anybody in the industry to network. And
I think networking, building relationships, also just training and learning. Like a lot of that came from being in the office and sharing space with other producers, EPs, HOPs. So that's going to be a little challenging. It takes more intentionality. I mean, even for me and my producers, and I'm sure you experience the same, when you were in COVID, it took a certain level of intentionality to build and to train and check on them way more than before. Okay, and then, so last thing, advice for people just looking to break into the industry today. You have a lot of people even like changing career paths to get into production. You're shaking your head. Well, don't tell them no.
I'm not going to tell them no. But you know as well as I, and listen, I'm a white man, Nepo baby who had a lot of things given to me early on in my career. And I still have PTSD about how hard it was, right? So imagine not having that opportunity. Imagine not having that kind of equity, like not having those types of doors open for you. And going through the same thing. It stresses me anytime I think about coming up. Maybe because I came up in a different time where I was treated poorly, where I did experience a lot of that. My advice to anybody coming in is a couple things. The first advice, and I give this to everybody, is you have time. And you have to give yourself grace. Like, if you are 22, if you are 30, if you are 40, I can give you the list of all of the people who started at different stages in their career. And there's the obvious ones like the Sam Jacksons of the world. And
even Ava.
Right, Ava DuVernay.
She was what, 32, 33?
You have to give yourself time, you have to give yourself grace, which means that, like, if you're on LinkedIn and you're seeing everybody celebrating big wins and achieving these things and winning awards, that's not you. And you have to accept the fact that you are on your own path, you are on your own schedule. And if you don't give yourself that grace, you're going to be really unhappy comparing yourself to other people. So recognize what you have, operate from an abundance mentality, be thankful for the people in your life and the opportunities that you do have. Not to say that you shouldn't want other opportunities. By all means, go for it. But you have to give yourself grace, and you have to accept the time that you will eventually have, because we have a lot of it. And that's coming from me at the age of 45, and I think I still have a lot of time to make a difference. So that's the biggest thing for me. And I think the other thing is, I've got 6 qualities that I think every producer should have, and
let's list them.
I'll list them right now, and I'm sorry to anyone who's ever worked for me who is now listening to this podcast, because
I mean, I will say just before that, I've worked with one person that came from working under you at Complex, and she is by far one of the best PMs or coordinators that we've had. She totally systemized, built our new manual, no questions asked. I didn't even have to, I had 2 reviews, and it was perfected.
Shanice Ross? Yeah. I mean, Shanice is amazing.
Yeah.
She, I don't know if we're allowed to mention Shanice in this podcast, but I mean, Shanice, but I mean, she did Everyday Struggle. I mean, she was every day in the office, I remember right before she quit, she had just gotten her own apartment for the first time. And I'll never forget how excited she was. And I was on this Zoom, it was during COVID, and I was just like, I was so happy for her. But she's amazing.
Yeah.
I need to hit her up. But so, all right, 6 things.
6.
Transparency, right? And you and I talked about this. There was once a time where, like, especially on the agency that I'd meet, production would hold things close to the vest and wouldn't share. You have to share. Share your budgets, share your successes. Who cares if somebody sees your budget? Who cares if somebody sees your process? Who cares if somebody sees where you're at? Be transparent. Make your problem everybody's problem, right? And if you're struggling with something, bring people in, right? If you've got a problem that you cannot solve, that's like a 5-minute problem for me as a head of production, bring me in. Be transparent. Tell me what's going on. So that's number 1. With everything, and I mean that, like wholehearted transparency, right? Like, I don't want to know what you had for breakfast. I don't want to know how your day went last night. Maybe I do. It's not
do want to know.
It's not my business, but be open. So number 2 is being proactive, right? And we talked about this, right? Like the next day shipping stuff. If you see a problem 2 weeks ahead, let's talk about it now. And that goes back to being transparent. Be proactive and intentional with the problems that you think might happen. So if you think there's an issue, flag it now. The second hey, I was just thinking about this. What about this? It could rain where we are? What are we thinking about that? Hey, Italy just got shut down. Are we thinking about COVID? Be proactive in everything that you do and combine that with your transparency, right? So that's 2. Number 3, you have to be organized, and I don't mean you have to be organized like me or organized like you. Whatever your system is to be organized, pad and paper, some app, Excel spreadsheets, Airtable, whatever it is, you have to have a system, you have to be organized so that you know where your stuff is and where to find it, but more importantly, everybody else knows where that stuff is and where to find it. So be transparent in your organization system so that we all have it. So that's 3.
Okay.
Number 4 is you have to be innovative, okay? Which comes in a lot of sizes and shapes and flavors, but what it means is if plan A fails, have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D, and be ready to hit those quick.
Right.
Like you have to innovate any problem that you have, and you have to be willing to innovate, willing to pivot, willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done. You can't be stuck in the mud. As stubborn as we want to be, we don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
So that's number 4. Number 5, you have to be accountable. Yes. You have to be accountable for yourself. Make sure that you're holding yourself to the same standards that you are holding everybody else to. And so there's group accountability, and then there's accountability for yourself. And I would hope that you hold yourself to the same level of accountability as you hold everybody else to. But teams that don't hold themselves accountable, and that means that you have to be transparent. You have to call people out.
Right.
You have to call problems out. You have to be proactive when things, like that's about being accountable, is making sure that everybody is responsible for the outcome and for the successes and for the failures.
You included.
Most importantly, yourself. And that's 5. And then number 6, you have to do all of that with a high level of empathy. And you have to, obviously, you have to be a little selfish in this industry because you have to take care of yourself, but you have to put yourself into other people's shoes. Yeah. You have to understand where people are coming from, where their backgrounds might contribute to certain things, and if you don't have that empathy in you, just get out. Get out right now. You have no place working with me. Even things just going back to me being a white man, right? I have a certain perspective because I was raised in the suburbs and because because of my gender, if I only think about problems, I only think about situations that other people are having through the lens and experience that I have, how fucked is that? If I can't understand or at least try to understand where people are coming from or what maybe contributes to certain decisions or certain reactions or whatever, it's impossible for me to be an effective leader and to run a good production department, So you have to be empathetic.
And that being empathetic is what brings people back to want to work with you and collaborate with you as well.
Yeah. Now, that being said, there are people who definitely don't want to work with me. But I often find that the people who don't want to work with me don't share my values, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Because I feel pretty strongly about the values that I have. So those are my 6 things.
Those are great.
Yeah.
I see a David Weinstein production training school on the rising.
No.
Yes. Session at least. I think we need a workshop. This is just going to set it off. This is a precursor to it all. What are you reading? What are you listening to right now?
Okay. So I'm listening to, I gotta remember the name of this podcast. Music or podcasts?
Anything. What's inspiring you?
So I've been listening to the Bear soundtrack a lot because I think that the music direction, it's a lot of 90s songs and like REM and Bruce Hornsby and stuff like that. The podcast that I'm listening to right now, and I need to remember the name of the podcast. It's a podcast about soundtracks. Okay, so it's called Soundtracking with Edith Bowman. Edith Bowman is a music producer, and I'm assuming she worked in the industry, but she basically interviews directors and people in the industry on the music from their productions. So last week, she had an interview with Greta Gerwig on the music from Barbie. So she interviews, her podcast is about music in production and music and film, music and TV. And I think she's unbelievable, and she's really good, and she has really deep level. And if you like music and soundtracks and also film, this is a fantastic podcast to listen to.
Okay.
So
I've not heard of it. I will definitely check it out. Tell us the name again.
It's called Soundtracking with Edith Bowman. Okay. She's a DJ in the UK.
Nice.
That's who she is. And so last week was Greta Gerwig on the music of Barbie. This week's episode is Christopher Nolan on the music of Oppenheimer. Nice. And so it's a really good podcast if you like, music. And then otherwise, I don't know what I'm listening to. I have a really eclectic music taste. Mm-hmm. So I'll listen to everything really depending on what kind of mood I'm in. So I'll listen to this morning I was listening to Bruce Hornsby. Yesterday I was listening to Corday. The day before I was listening to jock jams because I was working out.
I love it. Well, David, thank you so much.
Thank you. This business is awesome, and it's crazy, and it's wild, and I like talking about it.
Yes. I love our conversations. It all started in a LinkedIn.
I know.
Went down in the DMs.
Did I reach out to you, I think? Maybe, I don't remember.
I think I reached out to you.
I don't remember. Either way, though, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, so then we've followed up and stayed in touch with one another. So it's been great.
And you, listen, you have a lot of responsibility on your shoulders because you understand as much as anybody about how building tools and building platforms and all of these SaaSes are going to be the future of what we do. I mean, anybody, you see me on LinkedIn, the things I get excited for are things that make our jobs easier. So hopefully you can do that. No pressure.
Yes, we're doing it with you on our side.
Well, I'm going to give you some real talk.
Yes. All right, awesome. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And that's a wrap.